We're going to start with the day before on the June 3rd. So PBY Catalinas and scouting patrols out of Midway, obviously they're going to discover the Japanese invasion force southwest of the atoll. Now, throughout the day, they're going to have additional sightings as well, but they're never going to actually see the carrier force of the Japanese there. Now, stationed on the base is B-17s, numerous B-17s, PBY Catalinas, and a few other planes as well, maybe some Avengers that haven't been used yet. But these pilots and these planes, they're going to harass the Japanese fleet. So the B-17s, they're going to come in, like they take off from Midway, they're going to launch and attack from about 20,000 feet, maybe more. And when they drop their bombs, obviously the Japanese Navy is able to evade, any damages or any issues. Nothing hits. The PBYs, same thing, turned around by anti-aircraft fire, and so it's really not. It's effective. Everything's effective, obviously, because they're doing it, and it stalls the fleet maybe a little bit. But of course, the Japanese are still making their way. Now, that night of the 3rd, 4 PBY Catalinas, they're carrying these Mark 13 dud torpedoes. Half of them are duds, half of them are working or whatever. They actually conduct the first nighttime raid against surface ships. And they come in at night and they launch torpedoes, but there's no effect. I'm not sure if they hit anything or
well, let's put that
anything.
into perspective. I mean, if you think about that, there's no night vision capability.
Dude,
right?
no.
They barely have instrument capability. So you're trying to not only you're trying to locate the Japanese fleet at night in the ocean where there's no city glow.
Yeah, no.
The Japanese aren't running lights on their ships, I'm pretty sure. Not at nighttime, not in a wartime environment. You're trying not to crash into the other planes that are flying with you.
Yep.
And then you're trying to dive bomb at nighttime with no night vision devices.
Oh no, these are torpedo guys.
I'm sorry. You're trying to.
They're coming in
which
low.
is even more dangerous because you got to get 150 feet off the deck.
Yeah.
Right. At nighttime. Oof, man. I tell you what, I'd be a nervous Nancy doing that job.
I would be too. But the Japanese are probably also nervous as hell too. Like, what the heck's going on? Like, what are these guys doing?
This at night?
Yeah, they're doing this at nighttime. So anyway, these guys, they continue on. They repel this assault from Midway. And by that next morning on June 4th, 4 a.m., Japanese launch 108 aircraft.
And it's important to point out that probably one of the motivations as to why they're launching so early is because the Japanese commander, that carrier task force commander, knows that Midway knows that there's carriers en route.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not going to be a surprise anymore, so we better get this battle underway.
Yeah, they were just attacking the crap out of them. So, yeah, so anyway, Japanese launch planes, and that's about 4 o'clock. By the time they get up in the air and make their way, they're bombing Midway Island by 6:30 in the morning. Unfortunately, the Marines there are going to take very heavy losses. The Japanese, their whole goal was to hit the island, soften it up a little bit, and also not hit the runway because their goal is to acquire that runway.
They want to use it. They want to use it.
They want to use it immediately.
Now, one thing to point out, because of hypo and knowing about this attack ahead of time, and then locating that Japanese carrier task force, there's pretty much no American aircraft on the ground when this happens.
Yeah.
They were all able to scramble and get up in the air.
Right. Yeah.
So
everybody's on high alert.
So that, just to put that into perspective, what the targets that the Japanese are actually taking out, the hangars and the repair stations, I guess, is for lack of a better term, for aircraft, all these things that they're hitting, they don't really matter because there's no aircraft in them.
Yeah.
Right? All the aircraft are up in the air. The things that would have mattered, like the runway, they're not hitting.
Right. Yep. So these guys, like you're saying, are airborne. They attack by so that was 6:30. By 7:10, 30, 40 minutes later, they're also attacking the Japanese fleet, from the air, like these B-17s. These
all
guys
the aircraft from Midway.
Yeah. By the end of the attack on Midway Island itself, everybody kind of becomes more aware of what's going on in the area. Japanese forces become aware of American naval forces in the area, but not the carrier forces yet.
They just don't know the whole
ships.
picture. They know something's going on. They don't know the whole picture.
Yeah, so they're realizing, there's a lot going on now.
Well, they also realize too. This is the Japanese carrier task force, that their first attack wasn't extremely successful on Midway Island.
Right.
So the admiral, the Japanese task force admiral, has a very difficult decision to make. Does he arm up his aircraft to be able to counter a U.S. aircraft carrier with torpedoes? Because he had aircraft in reserve armed with torpedoes in case that inevitability, or in case that outcome happened, right?
Yeah.
In case they run into an American aircraft carrier, he had planes ready to drop torpedoes on them.
Makes sense.
Does he rearm those aircraft with bombs so they can bomb Midway and have a more successful bombing campaign for the future invasion that they're ultimately there to have, right? That they're working towards. The Japanese admiral decides to call for a second air bombardment of Midway Island.
Okay.
So all those aircraft that are still on the aircraft carrier that are held in reserve, he orders that their torpedoes be removed and that they be rearmed with bombs. That they can drop bombs on the island, right?
Yeah.
But he does that to his detriment.
Yeah. Yeah, because now we know they're there, and American aircraft carriers are preparing to launch now, immediately. So when American forces begin to launch their counteroffensive against that first Midway strike, there's a guy by the name of Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron. This guy is like gung-ho. He wants, no matter what, hit these ships, sink them.
Mission first.
Mission first. It's kind of like duty before safety mindset, and that's kind of what wins battles in this kind of space. Now, in the prior to the battle and the training and everything he was speaking with for his squadron, it's always, we got to hit, we got to hit, we got to hit, we got to hit. This is ingrained in his soul and in his guys. So that morning, the pilots on the Hornet, they're ready. They're in the room. They're ready to go, and they're getting their debrief. And they find a message from Waldron, and it says, quote, "My greatest hope is that we encounter a favorable tactical situation, but if we don't, and the worst comes to the worst, I want each of us to do his utmost to destroy our enemies. If there is only one plane left to make a final run, I want that man to go in and get a hit. May God be with us all. Good luck, happy landings, and give him hell." End quote.
So let's talk about this a little bit, because the torpedo bombers, there's a few things that we need to hit on before we move on with the story. First and foremost, the torpedo bombers and the torpedoes that they're armed with. They are
crap.
The aircraft themselves are slow. The torpedoes that they're using, 40% of them are duds.
Yeah.
And then the remaining 60%, a lot of the times they don't hit the water correctly. They'll nose down too deep, or they'll nose up too high and hit the surface and then sputter out. There's problems with these torpedoes.
You got to be close.
That they haven't evaluated yet. After this battle, they will evaluate them and realize they need to make some serious changes. It's also important to point out that after this battle, these particular torpedo bombers will never be used in combat again.
Yeah, actually, so it's the Devastator they're flying now. And before this, they actually got Avengers, and they wanted to use them, or they were asking for Avengers. I don't know if the Avengers were back on Hawaii still, and other units were training. But this guy, Waldron, was like, I don't want them there. I want them on the ship. I want them here now so we can use them. Well, they didn't get them. So they're flying the old Avengers that were about to be phased out.
Yeah. So they're going into combat with less than desirable tools of warfare,
yes,
to put it mildly. Another thing that we should point out is that in a minute here, Fletcher, because the reason you tell this story is because Fletcher, the commander of the American task forces in the Battle of Midway, is getting ready to give the command to launch aircraft to attack the Japanese. He orders Spruance, as soon as practicable, launch your aircraft, seek out the enemy, get some sink some ships. Yeah. And he's going to do the same. Initially, he holds his aircraft in reserve, but it's not long after that he decides, I'm going to launch mine also. We know where they're at. We're going to go get them. Now, it's important to point out that just because Fletcher is in overall command, that means he has strategical overall command. So he can give the order that I want you to go attack them, but the how is up to Spruance.
Right.
Because Spruance is in charge of Task Force 16, which has, again, the aircraft carrier Enterprise and the aircraft carrier Hornet and all their aircraft that are on board. He's in charge of those. So tactically, he gets to employ those how he sees fit. Well, Spruance was not at the Battle of Coral Sea, whereas Fletcher was. And the way they launched their aircraft is going to very much paint the picture to how experience in combat works. Now, that being said, things work out positively for the Americans. You could argue that Spruance doing things the way he did saves the day. But again, a lot of his pilots are going to sacrifice,
At a big cost,
pay the ultimate price because of this decision. But when Spruance launches his aircraft, he tells them, as soon as you get in the air, go find the target.
Yeah.
When Fletcher launches his aircraft from the Yorktown, because he was at the Battle of Coral Sea and saw how piecemeal attacks with aircraft would work out, he tells them, wait until you're in a cohesive formation, go attack together, right?
Yep.
You think about some of the episodes we've done on the Civil War, because this comes up time and time again in the Civil War. You have certain commanders, like at the Battle of Fredericksburg, for instance. The American forces, the Union forces, are sent into the battle piecemeal. That's like one brigade at a time, and they get devastated.
Yeah.
Now, the American forces there had way more troops than the Confederacy did. If they were to launch a big bulk attack all together, all working in tandem, they probably would have won the day. It would have been a very costly battle, but they probably would have taken the field. But because they attack piecemeal, they get leveled, right?
Makes sense.
Well, Spruance has just sent his aircraft into the battle piecemeal. And unfortunately, the ones that are going to get into the fight first are the slowest and least equipped for battle, the torpedo bombers.
Yeah, terrible shame. So one other thing to add to that is Waldron, he's speaking with the command, and they want launch planes and fly southwest. That's where they believe the fleet to be. He wants to go directly west. And they say, well, no, you're not doing that. So in any case, he follows his orders, even though he doesn't want to. Somehow he turns out to be right. It's a weird thing happens, but of course, so the pilots, they man their planes. So we know Midway was struck at 6:30 a.m. and now it's 7:02. It's our turn to get airborne. And so the Hornet, they begin launching, and in this order, it's 35 dive bombers followed up by 15 torpedo bombers and 10 fighters. The dive bombers and the fighters, they fly at greater altitudes. The torpedo bombers, you're much slower and bulkier. They take from the lower altitudes their course of action here. And of course, at the same time, the Yorktown and the Enterprise are launching planes at this same moment. And, but like anything, it takes a long time to get each squadron up into the air. So it's not like they launch at 7:02, they're in the air.
And the Yorktown is going to be a little bit behind both those other aircraft carriers, because initially Fletcher holds them in reserve.
Yes.
It's not long after, but it's shortly after he decides to send them into the air. But there will be a little bit of a gap between the Hornet and the Enterprise's aircraft and the Yorktown's aircraft.
Yeah. Which is good. It makes sense. They got to coordinate their stuff too. And so, but in any case, so they're up in the air. Now, by 9 o'clock, Japanese scout planes spot the Yorktown. And so they know there's one American carrier out there. And because they spot the Yorktown, Japanese fleet slightly changes course, because now they're anticipating how they're going to take out this one carrier. Now, Waldron, at the same time, these guys are all in the air. He changes course. He's going to say, okay, I'm far enough away from my chain of command now. Follow me. We're going to go this way.
And something important to point out there, that is a very pivotal moment, because like you had mentioned that they had the dive bombers and the fighters that were with them.
Yeah.
Same with the Enterprise as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's about that time that the majority of that air wing, the dive bombers and the fighters, end up turning south and heading for Midway Island in search of this Japanese fleet. For whatever reason, Waldron is the only one that decides to swing north.
Yes. Yep. And because of that, Now, this is by 9:25. They're going to, Squadron 8, Torpedo Squadron 8, they're going to see three carrier groups, and they're going to radio this enemy position up. But for whatever reason, bouncing off of other scout planes in the area or whatever, this message doesn't get relayed to the other squadrons that were, going in different directions, like you said. So asking for the Hornet other squadrons to assist, they never get it. And he decides, we're going to attack immediately without fighters. We're going in. So they were all spread out in their search, as they're coming along. So now they're tightening back up into their attack formations, and they're approaching the enemy ships. Now, initially they had gone towards one carrier, but they were taking so much flak and anti-aircraft that they diverted and decided, well, let's go to hit the other carrier too instead. Now, I broke this down because these guys are flying at 60 feet above the ocean. And at about 16,000 yards out, Japanese Zeros from above and behind, they descend upon Waldron and his men. There's 15 planes. Now, 16,000 yards is 9 miles out from the targets. 9 miles out is less than 3 minutes. It sounds like a lot. It's really not a lot. So here they go. 30 Zeros descend upon 15. Now, Waldron and his wingmen immediately, like to his left and right, they're immediately hit and go down. He's on the hook, trying to get, these guys are trying to go in. Now, they got to get through the first barrier. The first barrier is the cruisers and destroyers around the carriers. And they got the anti-air, the Zeros behind them and diving in on them. And then once they get to a certain point, they're receiving the anti-aircraft fire from the destroyers. Out of the 15, only 6 of them make it past that
first
barrier. And now their next goal is the carriers. Well, within minutes, those 6 planes are shot down with one remaining. One guy. He comes in there. Now, first I got to say, Waldron was last seen standing in the cockpit. I guess he was standing up, getting ready to bail out. But coming in at 60 feet,
you don't have much time.
Yeah, he hit the water, and unfortunately, he did not survive this ordeal. Now, the last remaining pilot, George Gay, he's going to press the attack, just as stated in the quote I said from Waldron earlier. He's the last man, and he has it in his mind, I'm going to press this attack. His rear gunner in the back of his plane is shot and killed. He's alone. He's completely alone. Now, within about 800 yards, Gay is going to drop his torpedo. Target, I don't know which ship it was, but one of the carriers. There's a little bit of speculation. He thought it was one ship, and historians are saying it's another now. In any event, he drops his torpedo. He gets up over this aircraft carrier and flies directly over it, but his torpedo does not make its mark.
Whether it's a dud or
whether it's a dud or anything, there's no nothing to come of it, whether it missed or not. In any event, he's going to be shot down, and he's going to have a bullet he's going to have shrapnel in his left leg and a bullet in his left arm. When he's shot down, he's only a quarter mile from this carrier group. And of the 15 Devastator crews that made up Torpedo Squadron 8, he is the lone survivor, and now he's in the water. So, these guys, it's just unbelievable to think about.
Well, it's crazy to think that in Waldron's speech, he says, if there's only one of you left, still go to the target and drop your torpedo. And that's exactly how it played out.
What happened. It's crazy. That's how it happened. But that's what happened that's what happens. Now, there's going to be other squadrons that do something similar, but.
Right. VT-6 from the Enterprise will have a very similar fate. They're going to show up 15 minutes later and attempt the same thing. They're going to be by themselves with no fighter escorts. Yeah. And they're pretty much going to get 8 to pieces as well. I think there's 2 aircraft that survived that attack. Maybe a few more.
Couple, yeah, not many.
But out of the 16 or however many aircraft that they go in with, they have a fraction remaining. And none of their torpedoes have an effect on target.
It's a terrible shame.
But in the grand scheme of things, to them it probably did seem like an ultimate failure, but it was actually a very important occurrence in the battle.
Yeah.
And it's probably what is going to contribute most to this pivotal moment that we're getting ready to talk about. But as we had mentioned before, the Japanese admiral had decided to take the torpedoes off of his planes that he had in reserve.
Yes.
Right? And rearm them with bombs so that he can make another air assault on Midway Island. Well, when these aircraft show up, he realizes now, holy crap, there is an American aircraft carrier in the area. I got to do something for that, right?
Yeah.
So he tells them to halt changing, go back and rearm those same aircraft with torpedoes. But they're doing this fast.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have torpedoes and bombs all over the hangar decks on these aircraft carriers. They're not in the armory on the ship, right? Where they would be, armories on ships, they have extra protection against fire, against impact. They're armored. They're protected so that you don't get an explosion and have a real devastating day on an aircraft carrier. Well, because they're doing all this, there's fuel hoses all over the place. There's torpedoes. There's bombs. They're all just loose goose out on the hangar deck.
Some of them are still receiving planes back from Midway, and the fighters that are still up, they're trying to receive planes as well.
They're trying to do all this stuff. They can't. And on top of that, the Zeros that have been engaging all these torpedo bombers are now running out of fuel and ammo. Right?
Yep.
A lot of people will make the case that they are down low because they're trying to attack these torpedo bombers, but there is a 20-minute gap between the last torpedo bombers coming in and what we're getting ready to talk about. So, and a Zero can climb to altitude much quicker than that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that plays in as much, but what this attack by VT-8 and VT-6 does do is it delays the Japanese fleet from being able to counterattack an American aircraft carrier for 40 minutes.
It's a long time.
It's a long time, and it's precious time.
Because our guys are already in the air still.
Right, because now you still have the Yorktown's dive bombers and their Scout aircraft carrier, and the Enterprise's dive bombers as well.
Yep.
The Hornets.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this clip from America Fog of War, catch the rest of the episode here.